Okay, so I hope that everybody can hear me okay. Welcome to Cactus and Succulents. This is kind of a fun class that we're going to do this week. So we're planning on quite a bit of people getting on. Quite a few people have registered for this class. So I'm just going to do a short introduction and a little bit of housekeeping items before we jump into growing cactuses and succulents in our gardens and in our homes. So I'm Janice Terry. I work at Weber Basin Water Conservancy District in Layton, Utah, and we're one of the large water suppliers in northern Utah. And part of our goal, besides just teaching or besides just delivering water to people's houses, is to help people learn how to use those resources correctly. Utah is a very fast-growing state, and we need to conserve our water because we live in a high desert. Like we don't have a ton of water, so learning how to conserve it is really important. So that's one of our missions, or with these classes, is teaching people how to landscape and garden in a way that's good for where you live, that's good for Utah. So if you're joining us and you're from outside of the area, hopefully some of these principles will still apply. So we are going to focus on some cactuses and succulents that do well in the Intermountain region, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some inside succulents. So just a few things about asking questions. Because we do have so many people and we have a lot of information to get through in a short amount of time, if you have a question, ask it in the Q&A section. So we're going to need you to type it in. Sometimes people try to raise their hands and we just don't have time to stop and answer everybody's questions as we go along. So just get on, type your questions. Dave is in the background. He's my coworker, and he's going to be answering those questions as we go along. And then if there are questions that'll benefit everybody in the group or that weren't answered, at the end of the class, we'll go ahead and answer those questions. So those of you that maybe don't want to listen to the questions, you can go ahead and jump off. So we'll go ahead and get started talking about cactus and succulents. So I think that this is actually a really fun, if I can get my PowerPoint going, there we go. It's a really fun topic, and I feel like cactuses and other succulents have kind of had a bad rap, you know, for the reasons suggested on your screen, right? Like when you think of cactuses, what's the first thing that comes to mind? If you're like a lot of the population, you think of the desert, you're thinking of Clint Eastwood, you're thinking of cactus skulls and cactuses, or not cactus skulls, but like this cow skulls and kind of prickly, unfriendly plants. And we have this great joke on the right-hand side of your screen of this poor cactus who's just misunderstood and he just really wants a hug. So we're going to talk a little bit about ways that cactuses can fit into your landscape. They can look really good and they can benefit your landscape and add a lot of interest and variety to it. So how this class is going to go, just in case you guys are wondering. So we're going to talk a little bit about cold hardy cactuses that do well in the Intermountain region. So we're going to talk about cactus basics, how to grow cactuses in your yards and be successful. And then we're going to go through some specific examples of good cactus succulents and some other interesting plants that add a lot of interest to your landscapes. And then we're going to talk about some living arrangements and a little bit about how to be successful growing cactus and succulents inside in pots. And then we're going to finish up with some fun propagation, which I think propagating plants is so much fun. It's like free plants, and who doesn't love free plants? So we have these sad perceptions that people have about cactus, and I kind of like some of them. Like I feel like there's kind of an air of nostalgia to the old West, you know, and so adding some of those features into our landscapes can bring that nostalgic feeling into our landscapes. But we're going to revive some of your perceptions on cactus and succulents. Like I've kind of already mentioned, cactus and succulents can bring amazing variety and texture to the landscape in a way that no other plant can. So look at this image that's on the screen. Does that kind of make you feel like you're in the desert? Probably not. Like cactus and succulents, a lot of them are evergreens. So even through the winter time, you're going to have a lot of green elements in your landscape. They can be really cool statement plants. We're going to look at some agaves that actually do really well in Utah that you can put in your own landscape that are going to be really cool statement pieces. They're very drought tolerant, which is I think pretty typical, right, of cactus and succulents. When people think of those, of cactuses, you automatically think of the desert and those dry environments. So it only makes sense that in our yards, you can put them in places where they're going to get very little water and they're going to be very successful. These types of plants are very low maintenance. So if you're into not spending your Saturdays working in your yard and doing other things, adding cactus and succulents can be a great way to minimize the maintenance, but still have a lot of interest and visual appeal. And they bloom amazingly beautifully. Like, look at that image. One sad thing about cactus blooms is the bloom itself really only lasts for 1 or 2 days, and then the bloom fades. And so you kind of have a quick spurt, maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks, where one type of cactus will bloom. So having several different types in your garden can be a good idea, just to have those blossoms for as long as possible. They make great companion plants. So here's that blue-green agave. It's an incredible statement plant, but it's been paired with a lot of low water trees, ground covers, that large perennial. The secret to this, or to being successful with companion planting with your succulents, is to put like with like. And this is something that we call hydrozoning, where you put all of your plants that need only a little bit of water together, and you water them on the same system, and then you put your plants that need more water together, so you're not accidentally overwatering one plant and underwatering its neighbor. So, and really think of our mountains, like we have a lot of cactuses growing in our own mountains, and there are a lot of cool plants that we have, a lot of really cool Utah natives that you could pair with these cactuses that don't need water once they've been established. So cactus and succulents can be really great companion plants. They don't have to just be in a bed by themselves. So when you're designing with cactus and succulents, there are a few design principles to think about. A few things like repetition of forms or colors. So when you're putting plants into the landscape, it's good to have a lot of interest in variety, but it's also a good idea to kind of bring the whole landscape together and make it feel cohesive by having repetition in either color or form or those type of things. So in the top picture, we have a great example of this, where we have repeating color through this entire design. It's all kind of a gray-green color, and it looks really interesting, and there's a lot of variety in texture. So it still looks really good because they have that texture variety, but it still looks really cohesive because they've repeated that same color throughout the landscape. And then in the bottom image, we have some contrasting colors, where we have some brighter greens of the lawn and that manzanita, which is that low growing perennial. And then we have those really cool silver yuccas that are just a pretty cool statement plant, but we have other gray-green plants going on, so you're getting that same cohesive feel. So those are just some things to think about. And these are actually really good principles if you're designing any type of flower bed or any type of garden at all. You know, think about, how can I make my yard feel cohesive by having repetition, but at the same time, I want lots of interest through statement plants, different textures, and some contrasting colors. So we're going to move on now to how to actually grow cactus and succulents in your yard. And a lot of people have a hard time with it, just because they can be pretty finicky. But if you follow just a few rules, you should be successful. And the first thing to think about is drainage. Good drainage is an absolute must. Standing water is the kiss of death for any type of cactus or succulent. So in the top picture, you can see that whoever this is, I don't know, it's just an image of someone creating what we call a berm. And the reason why this is such a good idea when it comes to growing cactus and succulents is because If you have soil that is not really conducive to good drainage, like maybe you live in an area where you have a lot of clay or there's a lot of compaction, or the soil is just really moist for some reason, maybe you have a really high water table, but you're interested in growing these type of plants, you can create what we call a berm, where you put several inches of rocks or boulders, and then on top of that you would put a soil that is very gritty. You want it to be very porous. You want that water to drain quickly through the soil. If you're planting in your native soil, for the most part, you don't need to add any organic matter, which organic matter is just compost, decayed leaves or grass, anything that was once living that you've allowed to break down, and it kind of becomes that brown, soft matter that you add to your flower beds to add like nutrients as well as water holding capacity, those type of things. Cactus and succulents don't like that. They actually really like to have low, like, what's the right word? They just don't want a lot of stuff in the soil, because a lot of that stuff holds on to moisture for too long of a period and it can promote rotting of roots. So if you're adding cactus and succulents to your native soil, don't put any organic matter in. They dislike all of that, like peat moss and compost, to the extent that it's really recommended that when you buy a cactus or succulent at the nursery, that you remove the artificial soil from the pot. Most of the growing media that nurseries and growers use doesn't even have any real soil from the earth in it at all. It's usually a mix of compost and peat moss and then some kind of drainage material like perlite or vermiculite. And so what you do is you can take that little plant and just soak the soil, the root ball, in some water, and then gently drain or rinse the water away from the roots with some water. But after you do that, before you plant, you're going to want to let your cactus or succulent kind of sit out for a day, just so that if there was any breaking in the roots, those have a chance to callus over before you plant them. And that's really a principle for cactus. Most succulents would be fine just being planted in whatever material they come in. When you're planting, when you're thinking of where you want to plant your cactus and succulents, you want to make sure that they're going to have full sun in the summer as well as the winter. Most cactuses really like to dry out in the wintertime, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. And being in full sun during the winter will help them stay as dry as possible through the wintertime. If you're going to fertilize your cactus and succulents, you're going to want to go really light on the fertilizer and opt for organic options. And by organic, I mean like a fish emulsion or some kind of fertilizer that's not like a granulated chemical. Not that those are necessarily bad in general, but they're too hot for cactus. Cactus and succulents oftentimes are just a little more tender, and they want to have just like a really organic, natural type of fertilizer. And then when to plant your cactus and succulents, planting in the spring when it's cool is the best option. If you miss that window in the summer is fine, but you don't want to plant in the fall or in the early winter at all. And that's just because a lot of the cactus and succulents, they want to have a really established root system before they go into the wintertime. So just make sure that you're hitting that window. And if it gets to be fall and you're like, oh, I missed my window, but I really want to plant these great cactuses, maybe overwinter them in their pots and then plant them out the next spring. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go along. So when it comes to watering, this is where a lot of people fail when it comes to cactus and succulents. And it's because they want water, but not too much water. And so you're going to want to err on the side of too little water, but it's best not to err at all if possible. So they are going to want a little bit more water in the spring when they're coming out of dormancy. In the wintertime, they kind of shrivel in a lot of different types of cactus and succulents actually kind of lay down on the ground, and then they perk back up in the springtime, and they need not a lot of water, but they need additional water to get going. So typically, if we're having a rainy spring and there's plenty of moisture in the ground, we don't really have to worry about watering them. But if for some reason we're having a dry, warmer spring, then we'll need to give them some additional water. You can water during the hot months to encourage growth. A lot of these are going to do just fine without any additional water, but if you want to encourage your cactus and succulents to grow quicker, then you're going to want to give them some additional water during the hottest parts of the month. And then in the winter, like I said, they want to be dry, and so you're going to cut back on the watering, if you're watering them at all, to nothing in the fall, and that's just going to really encourage them to go dormant and to quit growing. And then this is pretty typical of most plants. You're going to want to water extra during the first season, just to make sure that those roots are getting plenty of water to get really good and established. So really quick before I do this is just a reminder, because I see that several people are raising their hands. We're not going to take time to answer questions during the presentation. We'll take time to answer questions at the end of class. So instead of raising your hand, please type your questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll get to them as soon as we can. So with cactus, they're spiny, they're really pokey. You know, it's like one of the key elements of a cactus are those darn spines, and those spines can really make it difficult to handle these plants. So there are a couple of different ways that you can maneuver your plants in order to get them where you want them to go, to plant them safely without doing harm to you or the plants. And the first thing that you can try is dig your little hole, hold your plant close to the ground, and just gently squeeze the pot until the cactus is loose, and then let it just gently fall onto the ground. And then using a stick or something, sometimes you can maneuver into its little hole. If that's not enough control, you can try the newspaper method. That's the image that we have on the screen right now. You can take a newspaper and roll it up, or even twist it to make kind of a rope. Wrap that around your cactus, and sometimes that'll be enough control. It'll be sturdy enough to move your cactus around without you having to touch the actual plant. But you can use kitchen tongs or heavy-duty leather gloves. With both of these, I would just say, just be really careful. With the tongs, kitchen tongs are typically okay, but a lot of them might have metal edges that, even though they're not sharp, you know, sometimes if you have to really grip a cactus, you might do some damage. So I would use maybe rubber tongs if you could, or some kind of soft tong. I don't know if that's a thing, but sometimes the regular kitchen tongs might do a little bit of damage. Heavy duty leather gloves are a really good idea. Just be aware that sometimes cactuses can be pretty nasty. And when you let go of the cactus, sometimes the spines will stay in those gloves. And so, you know, maybe have a designated pair of cactus gloves so that you're not accidentally transferring cactus needles, or what we call glockids, which we're going to talk about in a minute, around to the other projects that you're working on in your gloves. So just a few tidbits about cactus, and then we're going to get into some specific cactus types and varieties. So cactus, the green sections, or pads as they're sometimes called, are actually modified stems, which is kind of interesting from a biological point of view. They're just really fleshy stems that have been modified through evolution to store water. Because if you think about it, cactus and a lot of these succulents, they evolved in really hot climates. And so they've developed ways to store water, and, you know, in their little biological processes, even, all plants have little pores in their leaves or in their stems, where they allow a gas exchange. You know, like we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, and plants breathe in CO2 and breathe out oxygen. So cactus, because it's so hot where they are typically from, they've developed ways to open and close those pores in the nighttime, and they can take all that carbon in and store it in those fleshy stems, and then they do all of their processes during the day when the sun is shining. but they're just really cool. Cactuses typically have shallow roots, so they're typically pretty easy to transplant from one place to another. Their protective spines are really painful, as a lot of us know. You can see that picture on the bottom of someone who has those terrible little spines stuck in their fingers. And if you were to look at some cactuses, some of their spines, they have what are called glochids. And it's basically like a fish hook where it's really pokey going one way. And then if you like put it underneath a magnifying glass, you could see that not only is there one big spine going out, but there are tiny spines along the big spine that are angled back in. So sometimes, I don't know if you guys have stuck your finger with a cactus spine, and then as you're trying to pull it out, it's pulling the skin up. It's because of those glochids that are really just hanging on as tight as they can. And we've already talked about how most are okay without getting a lot of extra water. So we're going to go through a couple of specific cactus varieties first, and then we're going to go through some different types of succulents, and then some everyday succulents that we see quite a bit. So I've tried to select varieties that would do really well in cooler climates without a lot of extra care. You can get a lot of the cactus and succulents from our area to really thrive in your garden, but a lot of them have like you have to mulch around them in the winter without it being too wet, but they need some protection, so you might need to put a cold frame or covering over them, which to me it's fine if you're like a really like a collector at heart, but for the average gardener, if you're like me and you just want something low maintenance that you can stick in your yard and most likely be successful with, these plants are for you. So we're going to start with the spineless prickly pear, and we're going to do a couple of different types of prickly pear, and these are the very typical cactuses that we see in our mountains in Utah. These are those big flat-leafed cactuses that are quite common in our mountains. But there is a spineless prickly pear, and I love it when botanists throw the word spineless on the front of a name and expect us to believe that it's spineless, because even like there's a few things like this particular spineless prickly pear has fewer spines, but it's not spineless. It's like a thornless raspberry, right, that a lot of us have grown in our yards, and they're not thornless, they have less thorns. So these Opuntia, they have less spines, so a little safer, but they still are gonna get you if you're not careful. These are kind of fun because they're edible. So this is one of the varieties that you sometimes see in supermarkets, or if they have them. Sometimes they're not very common, but once in a while you'll see these cactus pads. And so this is one of the varieties. It's edible. Just make sure not to accidentally ingest any prickly parts. And then the top image on the screen, the fruit of a cactus is called a tuna, which I think is really interesting for some reason. But they're also very edible from this particular plant. They're edible from most cactuses, but these ones in particular are juicy and sweet and really good. People sometimes make jams with them. They make desserts with them. So if you're into edible gardening, this might be a fun cactus to add to your collection. They stay relatively small. They get about 3 feet tall and 4 to 6 feet wide in warmer climates. So they're not going to get that big, going through our really cold winters. They are a zone 6, so they're not quite as hardy as some of the other cactuses we're going to talk about, but typically they do okay. So this particular prickly pear is kind of fun. There's a large family of prickly pears called beaver-tail prickly pears, and most of them do great in our area. Some of them are zone 6, some of them are down to zone 5. They're a common Utah native. They are notorious for those glochids that stick into your skin like crazy, so just be really careful. Like one time, my sister and I are very into trail running, and we were running in the mountains, and it was maybe July, and we came across some cactus, and I madam plant over here. I love plants. And I was like, oh, a cactus. And I was like, check out this prickly pear. And I tried to pick one of the fruit with my fingers, and I opened my fingers and it stuck. And I was doing one of these things and I couldn't get that stupid thing off my finger. And oh, it hurt so bad. And I was pulling the little blockheads out. And so be really careful when you're picking those prickly, you know, the fruit, when you're touching these. They'll hang on to you for all that they're worth. But these are kind of a fun one, very diverse. There's a particular variety of prickly pear called potato, and those pads are really small and round, and it almost looks like a pile of potatoes, but they bloom every June, and which is kind of fun. So kind of a fun collector plant to put in your own yard. The starvation prickly pear, this is another wide variety, like class of prickly pears. Lots of different varieties. They stay relatively short, but they do spread quite a bit. Also a Utah native. I put zone on there, but it's a zone 5. I forgot to put the 5. So this is another great option, a pretty common one. Very pretty flowers. Cactus just have the most gorgeous flowers. I don't know, I think they're so cool. We're going to talk about a couple of chollas now. So chollas are really interesting because they grow relatively tall as compared to other cactus and succulents. So if you're looking for a taller type cactus, but you don't want to wait 12 years for, you know, one of the other cactus types to get tall, and a lot of those don't even get that tall in colder climates, this could be, these chollas, and I've got a couple of different types, could be a really good option. And these guys are known as the high desert walking sticks, which if I was hiking in the desert, I absolutely would not choose one of these as a hiking stick because they are pretty brutal if you get too close to them. But most of the chollas are pretty drought tolerant. They have really interesting spine patterns. You know, they're pretty cool. So the image in the bottom right hand is kind of a purple cholla that you can see, and the arms are kind of hanging down. That is what the chollas typically look like in the wintertime. A lot of cactuses change color as they go into dormancy. A lot of them will kind of take on a purple hue, and this cholla is an example of that. So he kind of dehydrates, and in the wintertime, he puts his arms down. And he doesn't look unattractive, but some people are maybe not the biggest fan of that. So if that's you and you're like, I don't know if I really love that winter look, then the silver cholla is a good option. In our learning garden at Weber Basin Water, we have the cutest silver cholla. It's one of my favorite plants in our entire garden, and we have a ton of plants in our garden. And the reason why this cholla is so cool, I think, is because the silver cholla, and there is a golden option, which is that last image, the bottom image, they're covered in spines, like absolutely covered. As you can see, you can barely tell that that cholla is actually a green color. There's so many spines on it. But in the morning, when the sun is just coming up over the mountains and the light hits that cholla just right, it almost looks like it's glowing. Like kind of has almost a halo around it from the light being reflected off of those spines. And it's really, really pretty. It's a very interesting specimen plant. They do awesome in our area. They get relatively tall. I think ours is, I want to say it's 4 or 5 years old, and it's maybe 1.5 feet tall by 1.5 feet wide. It's not very big. But this is kind of an interesting one because the arms don't droop at all in the wintertime. They stay upright and are pretty good looking. It's also Utah native, so shout out to those Utah natives. And it gets these yellow flowers that some people don't think are quite as attractive as some of the other cactus flowers, but it is really interesting. It's kind of got that pretty green yellow color to it. The tree cholla is kind of an interesting one because it does have spineless varieties, but once again, spineless is being a word that's used liberally. Obviously, you can see in that spineless image that there are some spines left on it. This one's kind of cool because it does keep those brilliant yellow fruit all through the winter time. So that kind of just adds a little bit of winter interest as well. So yeah, so we're going to talk about a couple of different barrel cactuses. And in the colder climates, we don't typically get really large barrel cactuses. Just 2 weeks ago, some friends and I went to St. George, and we were mountain biking on a trail that was called barrel roll. And I was like, why is this called barrel roll? You know, and then as we come up over a ridge, there's like this massive barrel cactus. And then as we went along, they were just everywhere. And I was like, oh, if only we could grow those in northern Utah. And there are quite a few different types of barrel cactuses that we can grow, but most of them are just not going to get as big or like as, they're not quite as showy as some of those bigger barrels. But this claret cup cactus is a really, really attractive one. Ours is blooming in the garden right now. And I think Red Butte Gardens just yesterday posted on their Instagram feed some pictures of their claret cactus, which is also in bloom. So they get these brilliant red flowers on them, and they're just standout cactuses. They're kind of fun because they're pollinated by hummingbirds, and the hummingbirds stick their face in the claret bloom, and it puts pollen right on their forehead. So when the hummingbirds are poking their beaks in and out, like they'll get bright yellow foreheads, which is kind of fun. They stay pretty short, so they're not going to get much taller than like 8 inches tall, but they do kind of grow out to be a nice little mound. They do really well in our area, easily a zone 5, and it's kind of fun that they're the Colorado state cactus. And when I learned that, I was like, I wonder what Utah state cactus is. It turns out Utah doesn't have a state cactus, but we do have a state cooking pot, which is the Dutch oven, so good for us, right? But it is also found in Utah, which is kind of fun. For some reason, oh, there we go. We have this Uinta Basin hookless barrel, which is kind of an interesting little barrel cactus that can get 12 inches tall and 12 inches wide, but in our area, because of our cold winters, it doesn't typically get that big. So it usually stays pretty teeny tiny and cute, and it's perfect for a area of your garden, maybe along a path, but not too close to the path, because even though it's hookless, it's not spineless, right? Also Utah native, very interesting. And I think this one's so cute because it's almost comical to me how large the flowers are compared to the teeny tiny cactus. And this is pretty typical for this specific type of cactus. So another fun specimen to put into your own cactus collection, which I know you're all going to start here in a minute. So we're going to move away from some cactuses. There are so many cool varieties though. We have, I don't know, I feel like sometimes when we teach these classes here at Weber Basin, we have a hard time sticking to our allotted time limit. Like we need someone to push a button and have like the Oscar music start playing, like the playoff music, but we just didn't have time to put more in. But there are so many cool cactuses out there. So go to your local nursery. A lot of the ones that specialize in low water plants will have a really cool cactus collection. I've seen some really good ones at Valley Nursery. Willard Bay Gardens typically has a cool and a fairly large selection of cactus. J&J's, I know I've seen some pretty fun ones there. So get out there, try some fun cactuses, and while you're at it, grab some agave, right? So there are some really interesting agaves that do great in our area as well. They typically, once again, don't get as big or quite as showy as the agaves that we see growing in southern Utah or in warmer climates, but they can still be really interesting. If you do allow them a lot of time to grow, they can get pretty big and make really cool focal points in your yard. Another kind of interesting tidbit is that there's a type of agave that's used to make tequila. So that's kind of fun. And it was used by Native Americans to make food, and they used it for fiber. And so they were one of the prime distributors of this plant. Like they're the reason why it's so widely distributed through the United States, is because they would bring it close to their villages to farm, which is just kind of interesting. The rosettes always die after they bloom. So I don't know if you guys have been to St. George or warmer places or seen these blossom, and we have some pictures, but after they blossom, that mother rosette will completely die back. But before she does that, she usually pops out a ton of babies on the side, and then you can take those and plant them around your garden. But it is kind of a bittersweet thing because they take so long to grow that it's like a bummer when your big one dies, but you do get a lot of babies from it. So that's kind of fun too. And the agaves are typically really shallow rooted, so they're easy to move around the garden. They're pretty easy to transplant if you need to. So this is the Hayward agave. It's a pretty good sized one if it's allowed to get as big as it wants to. 2 to 3 feet by 3 to 4 feet, a zone 5, so it can handle quite a bit. And so that top picture I love. I think it's such a good example of how these types of plants can be such cool winter statement pieces. We have some yuccas in our garden that during the winter time, they look so cool because while all of our perennials are laying down on the ground, you know, they've died back to the ground. Most of our grasses have been cut back. Our shrubs have lost all their leaves. We have these incredible agave, or not agaves, but yuccas sticking through the snow. And so this agave, it's an incredible winter statement piece as well as a statement piece during the rest of the year, right? But this particular Hayward agave takes almost 20 years to bloom, and then the blooms can reach up to 16 feet tall, which is pretty incredible. We have a Utah agave utahensis, also known as the Utah century plant, and these plants, the century plants, don't take a full century to bloom. That's a little bit of a myth. They're just agaves that bloom, that take so long to bloom that people are, you know, like, oh, it takes a century for these to bloom, but not a literal century for them to bloom. It just takes a long time. But the Utah century plant is a relatively small agave, only gets 1 to 2 feet tall, 1 to 3 feet wide. These are all over around the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you guys have been there, but when you are there, take a look, and they're everywhere. You can plant them in your yard. They're pretty darn cold hardy, but they are very sensitive to too much winter moisture. So if you live in an area that, you know, we do get a lot of moisture during the winter time, but if you can plant these on maybe a berm, the south face, where it's, you know, the snow's gonna melt and, you know, it won't be quite as wet, you can be successful with these. But they are really interesting, and check out that bloom, like, holy cow, so fun. The Pears agave is one of the most popular agaves in our area. It doesn't get super big. It's not really so much of a statement plant. You know, only 1.5 feet tall by maybe 2 feet wide, but they are really hardy. They have that cool classic artichoke shape, and their blooms can get up to 20 feet tall, which is pretty phenomenal. And look how cool that bloom is. Like, it looks like a Dr. Seuss book tree almost. So some cool agaves, you know, and I've seen them for sale at some of the nurseries, so they can be a fun thing to try and incorporate into your landscape. So we're gonna move on to yuccas. Yuccas are really cool, very fleshy plants. They store water in their stems and in their roots. But these guys typically have a really deep taproot, so they can be kind of tricky to grow. And they're pretty expensive too, because they take so long to grow. Especially some of the tree type varieties of yuccas, they can be pretty expensive. They're also known for their very sharp tipped leaves. So when I first had my job here at the Learning Garden, I was very anti tan lines, and I thought, I'm not gonna get a tan line for my shoes, so I'm gonna wear flip-flops in the garden, which was a very bad idea. And I have this distinct memory. We have these, I think they're the Adam's needle yucca, and I stepped too close to one, and the tips are very sharp, and one went straight up underneath my big toenail. And I've never wanted to say so many bad words in my entire life. It hurt so bad. But I wear shoes now. You know, it was a good lesson learned. But just be aware of that. So most of the yuccas have those sharp tips, so maybe just keep them away from pathways. If it's going to be an area that people are going to walk through a lot, make sure there's plenty of room between you and the agaves. Some of this presentation came from a presentation that was given by Ryan White from the Washington County Conservancy District. And in his presentation, he joked that their learning garden, which is full of really cool cactuses, is a place for free acupuncture. So just be wary of when you're planning where to put these type of plants in your yard, if they're cactus and yuccas and things that have the potential to do some damage, make sure that they're appropriately placed so as not to do too much damage to people's fingers and feet. So some really cool yucca examples. So the Joshua tree is a type of yucca, which is kind of interesting. For me, when I'm driving down to southern Utah, kind of you know you're getting close to St. George when you start to see those Joshua trees start to pop up. They're incredible, and they do okay in our area. If you can kind of put them in a spot where they're not going to stay too wet during the winter time, and if it can be a little more protected. But they're really cool. They're a little hard to transplant though, and they can be very expensive. So if this is a look that you really like and you're thinking like, man, I would love to have some kind of Joshua tree in my landscape, I think that looks so cool. There are some other really good examples like this beaked yucca. So I'm going to go back a couple of slides. That top image is I just forgot the name. Something candle yucca, the Roman candle yucca. That's a firework. It might also be a yucca, but it's the very common one that we see in our neighborhoods here in northern Utah. And it does really well. It can handle a little bit more moisture. It's actually native to the southeast United States. So it's a very easy agave to grow. Sorry, not agaves, yuccas. Sometimes I get confused, but these are yuccas we're talking about. So yuccas are typically in two forms. They're either in a clumping form or a tree form. And so banana agave, which is that bottom picture, I think it's Bright Lights banana agave, and that top picture, which I'm something candle. Why do I keep saying agave? They're yuccas. So Bright Lights, banana yucca, or the candle yucca, those are both clumping types. But we also have the tree types like the Joshua tree, and this cool beaked yucca. So these are typically a lot less expensive, a little easier to transplant, but they still have that really deep taproot. So they can be a little bit finicky, but they're just kind of cool plants. And these ones are going to be a little more cold hardy than the Joshua trees. So if you're looking for another cool statement plant, then this is a good one to try. Or the soap tree yucca. So we have this one in our garden before they built our new education center, and it was one of my favorite plants in the whole garden. I thought it was so cool. So we have this paired with a golden cedar, which is a yellow tree, and then it was right next to a tall Coronado hyssop, which is like an orangey purpley tall plant. And just that combination to me for some reason was so good looking, but it wasn't worth trying to transplant because they have that incredibly deep taproot. And so we lost our soap tree yucca that was 10 or so years old. I actually don't know how old it was. It was probably getting up there, but they are pretty slow growing, and they're kind of fun because after they bloom, like they have their little pom-poms, right? And they bloom, and instead of dying back, that's where they split. And so you kind of get this cool multi-branch tree, just like the Joshua tree. But they're very, very interesting. And the reason they're called soap tree is because their roots have kind of like a soapy consistency to them, like they kind of lather up. And so the pioneers would use them as soap, which I think is really interesting. So we're going to talk about only one Hesperaloe, and that's the red yucca, which isn't even a true yucca. It's a Hesperaloe, but these are very similar to the yuccas. They store water in their leaves and their roots, but these ones are different because they typically have shallow roots, so they're a lot easier to transplant. And the tip of their leaves are not nearly as sharp. But, they're still gorgeous and they're very reliable bloomers, and they can tolerate a lot of moisture conditions and soil conditions. They still add a really cool texture to the landscape, and their blooms last for a pretty long time. So the red yucca is the one we're going to talk about. I don't want to say very common because I haven't seen a ton of places, but it's common in our garden. So I'm like, it's very common. But you can find these pretty easily at nurseries. If you want profuse flowering, you're going to want to give it some additional water, but it'll do okay without any additional water. They can get 3 to 5 feet tall, 4 to 6 feet wide, so they can get pretty big, especially if you're giving them extra water. But these are just really cool because they bloom, and then that bloom just kind of hangs on for a really long time, which I think is a really cool quality to this plant. They also come in yellow varieties and different colored leaves. So we've talked about the cactuses and kind of some of the odd, larger succulents. So we're going to move to some of the more traditional succulents that we find in a lot of landscapes in our area. And we're going to start by talking about some sedums, and then we're going to look at some cool sedum varieties. So these are also known as stone crops because they grow very well in really stony, unfavorable, just really rocky, sandy areas, and they do really well. And it's for the same reasons that the cactus do really well as well, right? They have these fleshy leaves that hold on to moisture, and so when they go periods of time without water, they do just fine typically. So these you're going to water once a week during the hottest part of the year. A lot of them can adapt to getting more water, so they would do just fine as a ground cover on the border of your perennial beds. You know, they can handle a little more, but they don't necessarily need more water than just once a week. So sedums are a lot of fun because they come in so many cool varieties, right? You can see these two sedums on this slide. We've got that top one who, gotta move my little, yeah, the Cascade sedum. Super cool. It's got those red tips that add a lot of interest, kind of fleshy, flat leaves. But then below we have, they almost don't even look like the same plant, but it's another type of sedum called the Pacific sedum. It gets those cute puffs of yellow flowers, and then it has that incredible gray-blue color that would be a really cool contrast to bright green foliage for your typical perennial or anything like that. And then we have these other really cool types of sedum, right? Like how cool is this big variety of colors and textures and everything. So in the bottom right hand corner, we have a variety called Autumn Joy. And this one's really like an interesting sedum because it's like the black sheep of the sedum family, in that most sedums stay really low and are really used as ground covers. But the Autumn Joy sedum is a true sedum, but it's going to get about 1.5 feet tall, maybe 2 feet tall by 1.5 to 2 feet wide. And it's more of just like a regular perennial. Like it gets tall and wide, but it's very drought tolerant, and it gets a gorgeous flush of those pink flowers in the autumn, which hence its name Autumn Joy. So if you're looking for some interesting plants for fall interest, these Autumn Joys are a great way to go. And then above that, we have a Utah native called the Utah Sedum. It's that yellow one. Right next to it, how cool is that color on the voodoo? It's kind of like a ox blood red, like it's really pretty. And then below that, we have the dragon's blood, and we have quite a bit of that in our learning garden, and it just casually spreads and it takes over an area, but not in an aggressive, weedy type of way, which is good. And we also have some of this lime zinger in the bottom left-hand corner. So a lot of cool different types of sedum. Most of them do great in our area. Most of them are very cold tolerant. They do prefer drainage, but like I said, they can handle a little bit more moisture. So we're going to talk a little bit about ice plants. These are really, really fun. So they're going to bloom for like a minute, like profusely. You're like, holy crap, look at that carpet of color. And then they kind of slow down their blooms, but they really don't quit blooming completely until the fall, which is kind of fun. And like the sedums, they really only need water once a week, but can handle a little bit more. And the flowers just come in a huge range of colors. So with these ice plants, the foliage is interesting, but you're not going to get a huge variety from ice plant to ice plant. Like the foliage all looks about the same. You might have different hues of green, but beyond that, all of the foliage looks basically the same. So you are growing this plant for the flower. And as you can see, we have some pretty cool varieties like this Moonstone, which is the top one, this Ruby, which is the bottom one. Like that has 4 different colors on one flower. So fun. Lavender Ice is that top right hand variety. Then we have just a plain purple, and then the hardy yellow, and then this garnet color as well. So lots of fun colors and varieties. Something that I really love about that hardy yellow ice plant, so it's very cold tolerant, and it kind of just wanders and doesn't need a lot of extra water and just kind of fills in an area, and it's adorable. But in the fall, as the weather is cooling off, those green fleshy leaves turn a pretty brilliant red color. So that just adds a little bit more winter interest, you know, when we don't have snow on the ground, But still, we spend quite a bit of time in the winter in Utah just looking at a kind of gray and brown landscape because the snow melts. And then what do we have? We have hardy yellow ice plants that have turned red. So I would highly recommend them. Hen and Chicks are really popular succulents in our area as well. They are very cold tolerant for the most part, and they come in, once again, just like a slew of colors and forms, which is super fun. Once again, they really only need water once a week in the hot part of the year. And they spread by putting out those chicks on the side. So that's why they're hen and chicks, is because that initial rosette is like the hen, and then the chicks are like the babies that it puts out to the side. And these are similar to the agave in that once they bloom, which they don't bloom super often, that mother rosette will die, but then she's put on so many babies that you probably won't miss her. And they do grow fast enough that, you know, you're not going to be like, oh no, my hen died and now I just have a ton of baby chicks. Like, those chicks grow up really fast. So here are some options, some really interesting different hen and chicks. That top middle one, cobweb buttons, is so interesting to me. Like, it looks like cobwebs are covering this hen and chick plant. And it's called buttons because like that one has, like, those heads are so small. You can't really tell from the picture, but it's like a bunch of little teeny tiny heads covered with that cobweb-like material. But then the one on the top right hand side, that one's called oddity, and you can see from the leaves, it like doesn't even hardly look like a hen and chick plant. Like, so many cool options. Then we have the fuzzy wuzzy, which I think is just hilarious for its name, and the royal ruby in the middle. Lots of cool red varieties of hen and chick plants. That Pacific blue ice I think is just gorgeous. It almost looks like a mini agave plant. I think it's so pretty. So hen and chicks, hard to kill, man. Like, they're super hardy, and they just add so much flair and flavor. And hen and chicks are pretty popular, and so you can usually find really cool varieties in your local nurseries. So those are the cactuses and succulents that I've selected as some of my favorites and some that I think you guys would be successful at growing. So we're going to talk a little bit about making living arrangements and having cactus and succulents inside. And we're going to focus more on the succulent side of things, but the principles that apply to growing succulents inside also grow to growing cactus inside. So when you're making living arrangements to either have outside or inside, you can use any of the hardy succulents and cactus that we've talked about. But then there's a whole world of non-hardy succulents that you can also use. Like these Agave plants are super popular right now. They almost look like hen and chicks. You have crassula, graptivera, so many type of cool succulents you can use. If you are using the hardy succulents and cactuses, one kind of cool thing is after you're done with your arrangement, you can just plant those out in your garden and they're gonna keep growing and looking great. The non-hardy ones, obviously, if they get leggy or whatever and you want to transplant them, you just have to transplant them somewhere inside. And I want to pause really quick to just mention something that has to do with putting hardy perennials or cactus or succulents or whatever into pots and leaving them outside. So we get asked quite often about, like, can I put perennials in my patio pots and will they grow back every year? And the answer is sometimes. It completely depends. And the reason for that is because even if like a perennial is labeled so it grows in our zone, and by zone I mean hardiness zone, the USDA, or the United States Department of Agriculture, has divided up the United States in what we call hardiness zones. And those zones are based off of our lowest temperatures, our lowest average temperatures. So here in Layton, Utah, we are about a 5B, 6A, which means that our temperatures usually are going to get down to around, or the coldest that we typically get is -10 to -15 degrees. So if I select a perennial or a cactus, because that's what our class is about, if I select a cactus and it says this cactus grows at a zone 5, then I am pretty confident that it has the ability to survive our winters. Now, being factored into that is the insulation that the ground is going to give that plant, that the snow is going to give, and all of those, you know, the elements of it being buried in the ground are going to give it. When we take a plant and we put it in a pot, we're putting it above the soil. And so all of a sudden, the roots of that plant and the crown of that plant is going to get to the same temperature, that same cold temperature that the ambient air is going to be. And so we have a lot of plants that can grow great in the ground that as soon as you put them in a pot, they're going to really struggle. So just because your cool cactus might say it's a zone 5, so you think, oh, I live in Layton, like I also live in a zone 5, I'm going to put it in a pot, there's a pretty good chance that that plant's not going to survive. So you're going to want to, if you're going to try and put a plant in a pot, maybe select a plant that is rated for an even colder climate. At my parents' house, they've got hen and chicks like crazy, a ton of different varieties that have lasted for a long time in pots. We have some sedums that are doing great and have done great for years, but we've also had some hen and chicks not survive, and we've also had a couple of sedums not survive. So one of my favorite things about gardening is that our gardens and our landscapes they're ever changing, right? So if you add a cactus and you're like super excited and it doesn't do well and it dies, like don't get frustrated and just say I'm never growing a cactus again. Like maybe put in a different type of cactus or a different succulent or a cool agave plant and see what happens. And if things die, you just put new things in. And if you have a plant you love that's doing well in your yard, maybe think about putting it elsewhere in your yard. So I love how landscapes just kind of evolve and change over time, just based on the fact that we build our landscapes using living things. So just kind of something to think about when you're making your pots. If you're going to leave them outside for the winter, be aware that they might not survive. But the key to succeeding with any succulent in any living arrangement is to neglect them nearly to death. And like literally, once again, err on the side of too little water, but it's better not to err at all. So if you have succulents indoors, you're going to only want to water them every few weeks. You know, a lot of cactuses, maybe once a month is all you're going to water them. Outdoors, if you've got succulents in pots, particularly if they're non-hardy succulents, a lot of those need to be watered 1 to 2 times a week, but they also need to be put in some part shade, just because those non-hardy succulents can sometimes get some sunburn. So just some things to think about. Watering tips. So really with any plant, the goal is to soak them really well and then let as much time as possible pass between waterings. So when it comes to watering your succulents, you're going to want to water them very well and then let all of that excess drain away. Like drainage is so important. So sometimes we think that cactus and succulents look so cute and this perfect pot, but it doesn't have any drainage holes. Oh no, what do? You can mitigate that by putting rocks in the bottom, like a few inches of good rock, and then maybe some sand or some pea gravel or something to hold the soil on top of that. But then you're going to just want to be so careful when you're watering, because once again, standing water is the kiss of death for cactus and succulents. And I had the funnest roommate. She was the best, but she bought these succulents from Costco, and they came in these cutest pots. There were 3 succulents side by side, and she's like, Janice, you went to school for horticulture, you were in charge of these. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be in charge of these succulents that don't have any drainage. And so she's works in the medical profession, and she had like a syringe, and she'd be like, I gave the succulents 5 milliliters of water today, is that enough? And I'm like, I don't know what type of soil is underneath that. I don't know if it's holding on to the soil. I don't know if it's draining out. I don't know if it's sitting in water. It just gets so difficult to be successful with long-term succulents inside if there's no drainage. Her plants all died, bless their hearts. We tried so hard. But basically, when you have that situation where you have no drainage, rocks, and then soil sitting on top of the rocks, you're going to want to just carefully water it to the point where the soil looks like it's all wet, and then you're done. And then you're done until the soil is completely dried out again. And then you go back in and carefully water so it looks like the soil is wet, and then you're done again for for a few weeks. So I would highly recommend pots that have drainage, and it's going to be a lot easier. There are some cactus and succulents, are non-hardy varieties, that can handle a little more water. So once again, just have fun picking new plants. If yours die, it's a great excuse to go to the nursery and get more. So when it comes to picking a potting mix, you're going to want to mix your potting soil, or even the succulent specific or cactus specific soil, with more drainage, with gravel or something called turface, which is like a really broken down rock, or perlite, which is the white thing that you like, the white stuff that's in potting soil. And it's basically just anyways, it's just for drainage, because once again, you just drainage. And basically with the soil, you want it to get moist and to retain some moisture, but you want most of that moisture to just quickly dissipate. Because if you think about how cactus and succulents have developed and evolved over time in their native habitats, they typically get one large watering and then they are dry forever. And then another large rainstorm and then dry. And that's what we're trying to replicate for the most part. So we're going to talk a little bit about propagation now, which is a lot of fun. I think plant propagation is so fun. It was my favorite class in college. And because it's basically free plants. I'm saving you guys money right now, so take notes. And I guess I should say, speaking of notes, we will post this presentation online as soon as we can. So hopefully tomorrow at the latest, we're recording it, and so you can go back and watch it, and the slides will be available as well. So if you just want the slides and you don't want to hear me talking, get on our website at weaverbasin.com and you can download those. So when you're trying to propagate cactus that have pads, or really anything that grows in like those fleshy pads, super easy. Cactus and succulents are so easy to propagate. You cut off the pad. You're going to let that pad sit for a few days, and that's to allow the cut to kind of scab over and dry up, because I can almost guarantee that you guys will lose more cactus and succulents to overwatering and rot than you will from underwatering. So if you have a fleshy cut that's still wet and you put it into moist soil, it's just creating an environment for rot to happen. But if you let it scab over and then you put it into your soil, you're going to have a much higher success rate. So you literally see how that girl is carefully using her tongs. She's just cutting off that pad with scissors. You're going to let it sit for a few days, stick it in some soil. You will want to keep the soil pretty evenly moist while these plants are getting established. Really small little roots need to have a bit more moisture, whether they're a cactus or whether they're a perennial or whether they're any other type of plant. And then as you keep watering and tending that plant and making sure it's getting enough sunlight, it wants a lot of sunlight, in not too long of a period, typically depending on the plant, you'll see new pads starting to grow from the top of the old pad as well as from the side. So kind of a fun project. If you guys have cactus and you're like, oh, I think I want more, give this a go at home. You know, you're not going to kill the mother plant by taking off some of the pads. If you've got something like agave or yucca or hen and chicks, these typically propagate themselves by putting out what we call pups on the side of the mother plant. So you can see in that top right hand image, we have this gorgeous, I think it's some kind of variegated agave. And she's put out all kinds of little pups around her. So this person has dug that agave up, and he's just carefully separated the pups from the mother. And then once again, it's not a bad idea to let the pups sit just for a day, maybe two, to let any types of damage or any damage that's happened to the roots kind of callus over or dry before you put it in the pot and then add soil to it. But pretty easy, like, you know, not too difficult. Some will already have roots and can carefully be separated and planted. So these are like your hen and chicks. Oftentimes, if you look at the neck of the chicks that are on the side of the mother plant, you'll see, and you can kind of see it in this picture. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse pointing at it, but at the base of that little baby chick, I guess we'll call it, the pup, there's already a little root that's growing. And so you literally can just clip those babies off, stick them in some new soil, and they're going to take off and do a good job. On the right-hand side of the screen, we've already looked at this image. That's the dragon's blood sedum. You can see all of those roots on like the stem of that plant that's kind of drooping down over the edge of the pot. All of those are roots. So if you cut that off, and with these, like they're vigorous enough growers, you probably don't need to worry too much about letting the cuts callus over. You can just stick those straight into the soil and they're gonna start growing. So, and then this I think is so much fun. So mostly this type of propagation is for like some of our non-hardy succulents, but you could do this for cactus, I guess. I've never really seen it tried because just sticking your cactus pad right into the soil is so much easier. But you can, I'm gonna see if I can move my video out of the way a little bit, but you can just break off some of the leaves from some of your non-hardy cactus or succulents, not really cactus, but those succulents, lay them on a really porous soil. And it does take a couple of weeks for them to do this, but they'll just start growing a little plant out of the end of the leaf. And so that bottom right-hand image I really like, because on the top right of the bottom right-hand image, we've got a mostly green leaf with that little tiny baby plant. And then it's showing kind of through time how those are going to look. And you can see that leaf is starting to, it starts to crinkle up, and then it kind of dries up and just breaks right off. And then you can't really see it super great in that image, but all of those little tiny baby succulents are starting to put roots down into the soil. You will need, and I put mist, but I meant to say like, you take a spray bottle and just gently spray those roots relatively often, because even though they are cactus and succulents that don't want to stay wet, like those baby roots at this stage will have to be kept pretty moist until they've had a chance to really get established. So I think that's my last slide. So I've got some resources at the end here of some of the places that you can look for different cactus and succulents. But Dave, were there any questions that need to be answered? Dave?
Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
It took me a minute. I've been typing and answering questions as we've gone. So there's not any outstanding questions.
Oh, good.
There were some, though, that you may want to just reemphasize of hardiness zones. There's some people that are participating that live at a little higher elevations. If you know some specific varieties that might work for areas such as mountain green and, you know, in the zone 3, zone 4.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know any off the top of my head. Like what we have in the garden, I think we do have some varieties that would do well. I know a lot of the hen and chicks will do just fine in that area. I know that quite a few of the sedums will just thrive and love it. But there are some really great resources online. Utah State University has some really good resources about growing succulents and cactus. I've got this handy book. Cacti and Succulents for Cold Climates. This is a really good one it's by Leo J. Chance. It's a really good one about growing cactus and succulents in really cold climates. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of the agaves and like some of the like Joshua tree yuccas, those won't do okay. But some of the red yucca, that's the Hesperaloe, will probably do just fine. And then, like, you know, some people think that, oh, I live in a really cold climate, cactuses probably aren't going to work. But a lot of, it's like almost all 50 states have native cactus and succulents. And a lot of the cactus and succulents that like explorers have found and brought back to the United States were found in the high Andes and the high mountains of South America, and so a lot of them I would assume do well. You just have to do a little bit of searching on your own.
So Janice, there's also a question maybe about some of the best indoor succulents.
Oh yeah, so when it comes to indoor succulents, basically the world is I don't know, at your disposal. You can grow almost any succulent inside, whether it's hardy here, cool hardy, not hardy. There's just so many. Like if you go to J&J's, they have a whole late in here, they have like a whole section of succulents, and I don't really think that any are really easier to grow than others. You just have to be really wary of watering and drainage, and once you got that down, you'll be fine.
Okay, here's another one. I live in Northern Virginia with a lot of clay soil. How can I prep my bed to support succulents in the ground?
So if I had a clay soil, I would try to berm it if at all possible, to create kind of a berm with loose, really well draining soil to plant your cactus and succulents in. Because when you have clay soils, even if you were like, okay, I've got this area, I want to grow cactus in this area in the ground, so I'm going to till in all kinds of stuff to loosen it up and improve the drainage. What you do is you're going to make an area that the roots are going to thrive in, and they're not going to want to go outside of that well prepped area. And what we typically see happening too is you create layers of soil, and when it comes to watering, one layer will fill up completely before it starts to percolate into the following. So it's really tricky to plant directly into clay soils at all. So if there's a way that you could terrace and bring in all new soil that's really porous, or do that berm that we were talking about at the beginning of class, that would be your best option.
Okay, here's another one. Are there specific signs we can look for to tell if the succulent is being under or overwatered? And also, should we remove the brown pieces from the base of succulents?
Yeah, so if the leaves are just kind of brown and they're starting to crinkle up and the soil is super dry, that's usually a sign that they're not getting enough water. But if they're starting to just go limp without brown and crispy, that's typically a sign of overwatering. So limp and color and just wrinkly is overwatering. Crispy and brown is usually underwatering. I don't know if that makes sense. What was the second part to that, Dave?
It was about, the first one was about knowing if you're overwatering or underwatering, and the second part was about removing the brown dead material at the base.
Yeah, you totally can. And some people don't really like the look of, like, if your succulent's long and at the base your leaves are starting to kind of go brown and fall off, and you take those off, and so you have a long stem with like a little poof of succulent. If you want to, you can go ahead and clip that, let it dry for a day, and then stick it into some soil and let it start growing new. And that way you don't have a bare neck that is kind of unappealing.
Okay, there's another one. How much light do succulents need indoors? We have high efficiency windows and plants seem to struggle in our house.
Yeah, so I don't really know a lot about high efficiency windows. I assume that you mean by high efficiency, they're just keeping the cold air out, or the AC in and the hot air out, and then vice versa.
Talking about like the low E windows, they're better insulation, but they also have a film or something that helps reduce the light intensity that comes through.
Oh, yeah. So for the most part, succulents need quite a bit of bright light, and so I'm not really sure how much those high efficiency windows cut down on the UV light that's getting through your window, but that would make sense that succulents might kind of struggle. There are so many cool houseplants though that do really, really well in really low light situations. So if because of those high efficiency windows, no matter what you do, your succulents always look like they're struggling, then maybe just find some cool houseplants to replace them with. Okay. But yeah, for the most part, they do need a lot of light, like a lot of bright light.
Okay. Another one is, I have a cactus I bought a while ago. It grew a little bit over a year. Maybe an inch, but it's now going soft and yellowish. What am I doing wrong?
Probably overwatering it. I don't know how often you water it, but 9 times out of 10, it's an overwatering issue, especially if they're just going yellow and soft. It's probably a watering thing, or it could be a fungus. If they're getting overwatered at all, they're pretty susceptible to funguses, or what are they, like mites will sometimes attack them.
And then another one is, what about fertilizers with Christmas cactus?
So Christmas cactuses are weirdo plants because they're a succulent, but they're not really put in the cactus category in that you don't need to treat them like a cactus. You can water them like any other house plant and they'll be happy. Like I water mine, if I'm honest. I'm kind of a lazy indoor plant person. And so mine get watered once a week and they do awesome. In the wintertime, they get watered maybe once every other week and they do awesome. But they're not like a typical cactus or succulent where if they're getting watered too often, they're just gonna rot and die. They're more in like the tropical plant category. Oh, but fertilizer, sorry. So they're pretty much the same as any house plant. So I have mine on a monthly fertilizer regime where I mix together my gallon of water with fertilizer and I go around and do all my house plants and they're thriving really well. So I would just find a fertilizer that is labeled for Christmas cactus and then follow the label and you should be fine.
Okay, there's one more. How much light do you recommend for propagation of leaves?
Oh, okay. So they want light, but you're not going to want to put them in like direct light. Like you don't want the wind or the light to come through the window and actually touch the plant. Just make sure they have plenty of indirect light. So maybe by a south or a west facing window, but not necessarily in a spot where the light's going to touch them. When it comes to propagating, for the most part, as long as they're getting enough light, you should be fine. Is that all of them?
Okay, Janice, I think that's all the questions that have come in. Unless if we wait just another second, if there's any more questions, we can address those. But otherwise, I think that's it.
Great. Well, we'll go ahead and end the webinar now, but thank you all for joining us. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to email Dave or I. My email is jterry with a Y at weberbasin.com and Dave's is drice at weberbasin.com. So if you have questions, feel free to email us. We'll do the best we can to answer those. We do have some other classes coming up. So we usually do webinars every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And so the next one we're gonna do is a one on common weeds and how to control those, because weeds are an issue in everybody's yard. And so we're gonna do a weeds one, and then the following week we'll do a question and answer, just like if you have any questions about your landscape, Dave and I will be answering those. And then we're gonna do a tree one and a perennial one after that. But also, if you want to get on our email list, you can email Dave or I, and we'll put you on that list. And that way you can get reminders as well as the upcoming class schedule. So.
Okay, there was one more quick question,
okay.
Janice, and I was just typing an answer, but you can address it too. Is how do you know how much drainage you should be giving succulents when you're blending soils?
So you want the soil to be really gritty, like you only really need enough organic matter or compost so that it'll really moisten the soil, like it'll hold on to moisture, but you want it to be gritty enough that there's going to be no standing water. You want that water to move through that soil like immediately. So yeah, and then this one, could you show the slide for your resources again? Yeah, so we're going to just put that. Mostly it's just like where I got my pictures and stuff from, but there are some Butterfield Gardens, some presentations that were done by Jordan Valley or some other people. So yeah, so there it is, but it'll be posted online as well. So. And then how often do you repot indoor succulents? Just when they get crowded in their pot. It's not really a thing where you're saying, for Christmas cactuses, I have to repot them every 2 years. It's just once the plant is big enough, it's kind of exceeded the pot's capacity, becoming root bound, that's when you upgrade the pot. So not really a real fixed answer on that. You just have to watch your plant and do whatever you think is best for it. You can kind of pull it out of the pot and look, and if you're like, oh boy, look at all those roots, there's not hardly any soil to manage the massive roots, then you'd want to upgrade to a bigger pot. But if you pull it out and there's a lot of soil, to the amount of roots that you have, go ahead and leave it alone. So. All right, well, we'll go ahead and end the class now if I can figure out how to do that. But once again, thanks for joining us. Anything else to add, Dave?
No, appreciate everybody joining, and we'll just stay tuned for other classes that are coming up.
Yeah, and we'll see you next week for weeds.